Sorry, there is no PowerPoint, it's old school here. Now, on an undisclosed day, between 25 of August 2016 and 1st of September 2016, the president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, died. Undisclosed up until this month, we found out that there is an official dinner to commemorate the president on 27th of August, respecting the Uzbek tradition of having a sort of commemoration on the 11th month, so we now know it is on 27th. That was a watershed. It was a watershed because Islam Karimov was not only the first president of Uzbekistan, was the only president of Uzbekistan. Has been in charge since 1986, survived the collapse of the Soviet Union, survived 10 years of economic problems, survived Andijan, but obviously age caught up with him and he died of a stroke. What this paper wants to do is, starting from this instance of leadership change, to make a few connections between what kind of regional policy of integration in particular, we may see in post-Karimov Central Asia. It connects to my current project on Kazakhstani Eurasianism, but it also hopefully bridges with my future project, which will be much more related to a Chinese-sponsored form of connectivity in Central Asia. The Kazakhstani project works at state level, so it's a foreign policy analysis work. Whereas this one, if I ever started the OBOR one, will be much more of a grassroots. So in that sense, we can work out with your sort of very local to very, at least sub-regional, super-regional context. So the idea here is to work out what kind of input Karimov's successor, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, had on regional integration. So it's a reflection of 12 months of Uzbek foreign policy, but also connects with pre-existing form of integration sponsored by Central Asian state, and most importantly by forms of integration sponsored by Russia, and in particular the Eurasian Economic Union. So the first preliminary question is, why Uzbekistan so important for integration? Well, first of all, because of geography. It's the only Central Asian states that borders with the other four. It's located at the center of the region, got the biggest population, it's got a significantly important economy, and you can't trade if Uzbekistan is not connected. So when it comes to world region, Central Asia is the most disintegrated, statistically but also practically, because Uzbekistan under Karimov has withdrawn into a cocoon of self-imposed isolation, really, when it comes to regional power, to regional integration. So who is the new leader? Well, Shavkat Mirziyoyev certainly is not a Democrat. So in case you were hoping for good news, you're not going to get them here. He used to be the former prime minister, but most importantly, as one of my colleagues said to me while I was inquiring who's going to be the next president, he said to me, he had a tradition of work into the cotton sector, which goes back to the Soviet way of doing succession. People who control the most crucial elements of the economy get the political job. And so that's what he is. He's an organizer, he's a pragmatist, not bringing any political change, but as bringing some opening and some importance in terms of a change in terms of how Uzbekistan relates to its neighbors first and to the more far-flung actors in the other hand. So the first caveat, again, it's that things may change quickly. We've seen 12 months of relatively opening, and I got the data later on, but things may change again, because don't forget that the most important thing for Central Asian leaders is their own power. If in Tashkent they begin to equate political stability with isolation, it will take no time to revert back to what they used before. So this is an important caveat. So this paper really does investigate a triangular nexus: connectivity, integration, and regionalism. And in this nexus, not only takes account of what's already there, so the Kazakh sort of EU, but also what a reopening of Uzbekistan may bring about in the regional form of integration, which is now defunct, and how this integration relates back to EU. That's why I call them competing integration. In other words, is post-Karimov Central Asia emerging in a perspective that challenges EU association? And goes back to the old issue that we saw in the early 90s Central Asia. The Cholponata Agreement, you had the CIS on the one end, and then the common market in Central Asia going on. So that the states had to balance this, to juggle between these two tiers of integration, making a mess out of it, and withdrawing its isolation all the time. So, in other sense, is post-Karimov Central Asia the same as was in the early 90s? My preliminary answer is that no, because the changes that we've seen are specific and important in a way in which they challenge this critical nexus by querying what connectivity is meant by in Central Asia. Now, we've seen a lot of money being put into the One Belt, One Road, and these far-flung projects are usually not always bringing direct benefits to the life of the people. But the changes that we've seen in the first 12 months of Mirziyoyev have actually brought some significant improvement. Well, you could say, well, look, before nothing happened. Now, even just reopening a train line is yes, it's true. Just reopening a train line is a benefit for the people, brings connectivity on a daily basis, not just on demand people in Beijing, but also make sure that the region is more integrated because of economic, political, and cultural exchanges. So, again, this presentation here does not intend to query why Central Asia can become a region again. And if you read local scholars, and Farkhor Tolipov, most of them, you know that Central Asia is a region regardless of what trading statistics or Western scholars can tell us. But try to see how this return to embryonic regionalism, which may be temporary, but this doesn't mean that this is significant, may bring to how these states associate with the integratsia patterns promoted by the EU. So before I move into describing what Mirziyoyev had done, I had to make a few steps back and describing why Central Asia is so disintegrated. And this goes back to my Kazakhstani project. Well, it is the most disintegrated regions in the world. There is virtually no trade going on between the 5 states. There is virtually no investment of the 5 states into the economies of the others. The economic balance of the region is very sort of precarious, with the 4 GDPs of the other 4 being smaller than the GDP combined, being smaller than the GDP of Kazakhstan's. The energy outlooks of the region is not, if you want, complementary, because the exporters borders with exporters, and the importers do not know what the resource when it comes to water. So it's complex in that sense. Also because we got Iran in the mix, don't forget. That's very important. And also there is, at the moment, there is no single political organization in which the 5 republics are working together without an external power. So there is no multilateralism, there is no regionalism. And that has been the case since October 2005. Yes?
Sorry, me as a chair has just set me. The questions are after the presentation, so we keep up our schedule. Sorry.
Okay, so
if you may.
No, no, I will try to address your question while I go ahead with that. So the study is integrated. There is no multilateral framework. There is no sort of only Central Asian sort of forum to discuss, and it's been the case for 12 years now. The reason for that, to my mind, is because the state that is perceived to be the main integrator in the region, Kazakhstan, has been, to my mind, the biggest disintegrator. Because integration, as promoted by Nazarbayev, has been a Vanity Fair, to the extent to which he always challenged the imperial question we asked before by promoting forms of integrations that were antagonistic, adversarial to what Russia was doing, in order to recalibrate away the leadership from Moscow, the leadership of Eurasian integration. And we've seen that in the continuum, Eurasian Union, Evrazes, and the Customs Union, the pre-2011 one. We've seen that in which Nazarbayev tries to promote things that were done already at CIS level. So in that sense, and to do that, Kazakhstan ignored, marginalized Central Asia in its own foreign policy. And if you remember the Soviet domination of the region, got Central Asia and Kazakhstan, then got reintegrated in 1994 with Centralnaya Asia. But now we got the president of Kazakhstan saying that he would like to change the name of the states because he doesn't want to be a stan anymore. We want to be something different from the region. So that's the idea that I'm trying to promote here, that Kazakhstan has been the disintegrator of the region because he hasn't invested, he hasn't traded, he hasn't promoted any kind of Central Asia only integration. And that's the trust you were asking about. The trust you were asking about has really been queried, challenged by Nazarbayev, that has got a big clash of personality and goes back to the issue that Central Asia foreign policy is very personalized with Karimov. So those two leaders did not get along in foreign policy, and they did not work together to establish the region connected. There is a wonderful correspondence between an Uzbek scholar and a Kazakhstani scholar, Tolipov and Laumulin, about how regional integration was perceived in both Tashkent and Almaty Astana when Nazarbayev and Karimov were in power. And that really shows that it's not just a sort of analyst dream, but that really happened, that the personality did clash. So this is the system in which 5 states that have shared resources, shared interest, shared geography, shared security threats, are answering each of these questions in a single, independent way, rather than resorting to collective answers. So, totally disintegrated region, in which 2 states, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, are isolated. Kazakhstan plays different fields at different times, always for the equation between international leadership and legitimacy, which is critical to what Nazarbayev does, and then 2 smaller states that go along. So, by the time Karimov had died, there is trouble in Uzbek-Turkmen, Uzbek-Kyrgyz, and Uzbek-Tajik relationship. There is no land or air connection between the capitals of these cities, only between Tashkent and Bishkek. There are problems in between the trade structures of this. Electricity grid, which should be the basic kind of shared infrastructure. Uzbekistan is not part of that. Well, so we have an extremely politically fragmented and economic disintegrated scenario. Now, what did Mirziyoyev do? I'm not singing his praises, I'm just saying that what is done. 24th of March, he reopened the train between Almaty and Tashkent, 2 biggest cities in the region. It takes 16 hours, but it's still better than nothing, twice a week. April 2017, the flight between Tashkent and Dushanbe is reopened on a daily basis. $300, but it's still better than not having it. 20th of May, he signed a series of agreements with Turkmenistan to export electricity from Kazakhstan to Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan via Uzbekistan. And also in March and April, going back to energy, he secures a deal to reopen supplies from Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Russia. So pretty much he's trying to do not the long-term, big picture OBOR initiative. He's trying to go back to what is the day-by-day issue. And the fact that you now have a train between Almaty and Tashkent is going to be a big benefit for the shuttle traders. And for those who work on informal economies, they know how important shuttle trade is for Central Asia. People, they go to China, buy their stuff, cross the border in Kyrgyz, and fly and travel back to the region, all the way to Turkmenistan. Having a train, which only takes 16 hours now, it's going to change the life of many people. Families living in between Almaty and Tashkent can now connect. The Dushanbe-Tashkent, it's an important flight. So why it is different then? Why I think it may be different if continuing? First of all, because it addressed functionalism in a very substantive way. Not in the kind of Nazarbayev sort of up in the air fashion, or in the way in which Bulat Sultanov, which is a Kazakh foreign policy analyst, speaks about that. But he clearly tried to change how people and resources are dealt with and are crossing the regional borders. And if you think of that, he's tried to bring back borders to the Soviet understanding, in which they didn't matter, whereas in the last 20 years they actually become more important than they actually are when they withdrew into that kind of context. And this is the idea. If this continues to go, pick a difference between what the Uzbek-Tajik context could be and what the Kazakh-Kyrgyz border is. That border shouldn't exist if you listen to the EU. Try to get a cab between Almaty and Bishkek, you get stopped. Why? We don't know. But the border is still there. The second point is that we know that there is change coming in Central Asia. So this kind of new input may be conducive to bring about this new form of regionalism when the Kyrgyz elect a new president, there is the economic crisis in Turkmenistan somehow changes, and the aging leadership in Kazakhstan and Tajikistan can be addressed. So it could forge a new set of problems, a new set of, if you also, opportunities. How does this relate to the EU? First of all, it would perpetrate what already happened. So having a double track, regional versus at former Soviet Union level. But if we are to rejuvenate the trade relation, the cultural relation, the people-to-people exchanges in a more connected region, we then query even how the governments in Bishkek and Astana are understanding their ties with the EU. So the more the EU becomes an empty shell, if this continues to go on in Uzbekistan, the alternative would be more beneficial, if not for all the five, at least for Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, not Kazakhstan. So I find it very interesting because it is such a surprising region to study. Everything changes so quickly. And you would expect, if there was a place where you expect change to come, that was never Uzbekistan. But we've seen there are signs. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but we'll see later on. So to my mind, if this is continued, and we've seen, look at the kind of sort of normalization, or better, improvement of Kyrgyz-Uzbek ties, Uzbek-Turkmen ties, we've seen that there is somehow a rebirth of a region that seems to be dead for a long time. So I'm not talking about zombie regionalism, but what I'm talking about is the return to a more integrated way of doing politics, in which always in authoritarian context, but there may be a time in which these people sit down and discuss issues of daily concern for the citizen in a more integrated way. Thank you.